everyone coming into the stream. We're just going to wait a couple more minutes to allow any other latecomers to come into the stream. What you see right here is what we're going to be painting tonight. A lovely backdrop with a cherry blossom tree, very spring-esque, very summer. And we're just going to wait for a couple more people to come into the stream and trickle in. So as we're waiting for people to trickle in on the stream, feel free to say hi to those around you. This is open for everyone, not just the church family. So feel free to share this on your page if anyone wants to join in. And if you're coming in late or you have friends who want to do it after, it will be uploaded on our Facebook page after. So you'll be able to follow along, and you'll actually be able to pause it after the live video is over. You won't, unfortunately, be able to pause this live video. So if you ever need me to slow down or you need some clarification on something for your painting, just let me know via a comment and I will get it to you. Just be aware that there's about a 10-15 second delay on the live video to how it's getting to your computers and your screens. So just bear with me if I don't see your comment for about 30 seconds, all right? We're just gonna wait 1 or 2 more minutes and see if anybody else wants to join the stream, just so they're not coming in late. So with our painting that we're doing tonight, we're going to be starting with the sky. It's going to be a little bit of a sunset type sky. So the colors that you're going to want to use are some oranges, yellows, pinks, and you want to make sure that you have some white paint on hand. And you also want to make sure that you have some water on hand. I just have my little jar of water right here that I'm going to use. It is separate from the water that I'm going to use to help clean my brushes, just so that I can keep that water without any gross colors from all my paint adding into that. So I can keep my sky with its beautiful oranges, pinks, and yellows. We're gonna wait about 1 more minute, but if you wanna get ready, I would suggest putting in your paint palette or any sort of plate that you have, wherever you're putting your paint, some orange, some pink if you have it, some yellow, and of course some white to help lighten that up. If you don't have pink, you can always use red and white. Just mix it to your desired colors. In the Facebook page that we had all the information. I have specific colors that I am going to be using. If you only have access to the primary colors, you can make all of the colors that we're going to be using today. You'll just have to mix them to your desired color. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to get my paints ready. Make sure you shake them first. As you can see, I didn't shake my orange paint very well. I'm using some all-purpose acrylic paints. You can get these at the dollar store. They're very nice and easy to use. They're quite watery paints, but they do dry fairly fast. So we're going to get started just now. So if you're just joining the stream, we're going to be starting with the sky. It's got a lot of oranges and pinks and yellows and whites because it's a little bit of a sunset sky. I'm using a canvas that is slightly larger than my original painting, but that's okay. It'll help you see all of the fine details. What you're going to want to do first, you can either do this with a pencil or you can just use your eyes. The sky and the lake that we're doing is about halfway. So if you just want to do a little bit of a line just as a safety net, the line, if you just do it very lightly, or you can do it, doesn't have to be straight, it can be a little jaggedy. It's a shoreline, so it won't be completely straight in real life. I'm going to be going in with one of my largest brushes. You can use a flat-tipped brush like I've got here, or a little bit of a rounded brush if you want to use that. And you want to make sure that you're going to do your darker colors on this side, and they're going to pan out to lighter colors. And that's going to help to establish a little bit of your sunset colors and to show that the sun's setting in this corner, and it's painting the sky some very, very beautiful colors. So I'm just going to go right in. I'm going to start painting. I'm going to do a lot of mixing of my colors, and you can just mix it until you feel you've got a happy color that you like. You want to make sure that you're doing this all right now because it'll be a lot easier to mix all of your colors while they're wet. And if you need a little help mixing your colors if they get too dry, then that's when you grab the water that I was talking about. Don't worry about getting tons of different colors on your brush because they're all going to be mixing anyways. We're looking for that beautiful mixed sunset glow. And as a reminder, while you're painting, if you have a canvas like I do that has the edges here, make sure that you don't forget these edges while you're painting. I like to, unless you don't like to paint the edges, I like to go over with a black. Usually when I'm done my painting, I find that it makes the rest of the painting pop. Don't worry about going over or under your line. It'll be corrected with the mountains and the lakefront that we do. So don't worry about the sky being too messy because every color of the sky is beautiful. So now I'm finding that my sky is a little bit too dark, so I'm just going to add some white in. And you find if your paint isn't mixing very well, you can just put a little bit of water here on the tip of your brush, not too much, not too little, because you don't want to water out and see the canvas below while you're doing your sky. But this is just going to help me to mix a lot of my colors in my sky and help me get that desired color that I'm looking for. Just grabbing a bit more water to really help spread out that paint. As I said, the paint that I'm using has a very fast dry time, which will help with doing your paintings tonight as we're doing it virtually, so it'll be a little bit hard to pause and wait for the paint to dry. So that's when you have that as your backup. And once you're happy with how the colors are all blended, then that's your sky, your nice, beautiful sunset sky. If you find that it's a little bit too difficult to blend together all the colors, you can choose a bigger brush or a smaller brush depending on the canvas size that you're using. And you want to make sure that you're not working it too much with the water. You can see I'm starting to go to the paint layer below. I'm starting to bleed into the paint layer below with too much water that I'm using. So just be careful that you're not putting too much water in your canvas and watering out the canvas line and the paint that you've already put down there. If you want, you can put some accent colors, just little lines, using, instead of going flat with your brush, you'll be using just the lines of it. And then you can use the flat end of your brush to blend those out. Now everyone's sunset sky is going to look a little bit different depending on the colors of paint you use, how much you like a certain color. Maybe your sky is more of a peach. Maybe your sky is a very burnt orange. It doesn't matter, it's your sunset and you can decide what you want it to look like. We're going to give just a couple seconds to dry, but next we will be moving on to our lake portion. If you are done with your sky and you want to get ready, you're going to be using blue and white to help with creating your lake and creating the dimensions of your lake. You can use much the same brush that I'm using here, just make sure that you wash it out and dry it thoroughly, because as I said, you're using the water to spread the paint here. So if your brush is wet, you won't be able to get a nice fine line with your paint. So make sure if you're going to use the same brush that you wash it thoroughly so none of that orange comes out, and that you dry it thoroughly so that it doesn't spread your water and make it look too watery. And again, at any time, just let me know if I'm going too fast. You can just leave me a comment and I'll slow down for you. What's the consensus on our skies? How are our skies looking? Are we ready to move on? So for the lake, I'm going to be using, this is the blue that I used, Copenhagen blue. But again, you can use any different kind of blue that you have with you. I'm just going to get that ready. And I'm going to get myself a little bit more white to help blend out that harsh blue. If you have a little bit of a lighter blue paint, then you might not need to blend it out as much, but I'm actually going to already create my blue a little bit lighter. I'm just gonna add a dollop of white in there, and I'm just gonna mix it with one of my smaller brushes, just so I can already start with one of those lighter blues, and then I don't have to keep trying to blend it when it's such a dark blue. So it looks like we might be ready to start our lake or ocean or whatever you imagine your body of water is in your painting. So we're just going to go in much the same method that we used with the sky. However, and you're going to keep going with the dark to light theme. You want to make sure that it's a little bit of a darker blue on this side and it kind of bleeds out to a lighter, maybe almost white blue. It depends on the color that you want your lake to look like. And again, don't worry about how messy this is because it's going to be covered with our mountains. But if it makes you feel a little bit better to cut just a nice line, you can just use the edge of your paintbrush to cut alongside. But make sure that you're not going over it too much. You can kind of see the orange peeking through. So I want to make sure that I'm not working too hard with the paint. And again, remembering to draw that paint out to the sides and the corners of your canvas if that's what you like your painting to look like, or whether you just like to keep the sides white, or like me, you like to paint them a little bit of a darker color to help the picture pop more. So I've laid the foundation of my blue in a little bit of this triangle U shape. So then I can go in with my white and I can just blend it out. And again, you might need a little bit of help with some water to help blend out your blue and white paint. Because as I said, it dries very fast. I've just painted this and it's only barely coming off on my fingers. It's a very fast paint that dries. And again, don't worry about getting all these colors on your brush. Just make sure that if you're using any pure white paint for the future of this painting, that you don't use the paint that you've been dipping your already colored brush into, because then you're going to get a little bit of blue in there and you're not going to know where it came from. And you'll be wondering all day where that blue came from that made its way into your painting. So I'm just going to go ahead, I've laid most of my base. I just want to blend it all, so I'm going to use a little bit of my water to help blend it just a little bit more. Make sure not to go over it too much because, as I said, you might go down to the layer of the canvas below. And you don't want to do that because then you'll have to wait for it to dry before you can move on with the next portion of the painting. You find if you're having chunky lines while you're doing this, just twist your brush ever so slowly as you're going, and that will help to get rid of a couple of the chunky lines that you might be leaving with the end of your brush. And then you can just continue to blend those out by using your brush flatly. This will be quite easy if you're using one of these rounded brushes instead of the flat brush that I'm using. The round brush will help blend out a lot better. And I'm just going to go in and I'm going to do some fine detail work and just fix up a little bit of the shore. But again, this will be fixed with the mountains when they come in, which we will be doing next once our sky is completely dry. To make sure that your sky is completely dry, you can just give it a very, very small touch test. If you find that your paint isn't drying very fast, you can use a hair dryer if you got one of those handy. And that will help make your painting dry just a little bit faster. We're going to go in, we're going to do some fine detail work. I'm just going to use a little bit of a small brush. I can also go back to using my big brush if I find that that's not working for me. I'm just going to get the littlest bit of white on my paintbrush. And what we're going for, just going back to our original painting, what we're going for is just the little crests of waves that might be in your lake. If you don't want to add those, feel free not to add them. I think it just gives a little bit more fluidity and movement to your lake. If you are going to be adding them, you want to put them in a little bit of a ripple formation. You want to follow with the colors that you've created. So you can see I've got my white here, so I'm not going to put them in a straight line. I'm going to have them follow along with the darkness and the blue that I used already. You can make them zigzag towards each other, blend them out if you'd like. It just gives a little bit of fluidity and motion, as I've said, to your picture, and it just makes it feel a little bit more alive. Maybe you want to make a little bit of a Z formation or Z formation. Just following that angle that I've created and lengthening it out. Now some of these will be hidden by our grass once we do our grass later on in the painting. That's okay, because then you won't have to go back over the grass and try and paint them underneath, because that would be a pain. You can also add some stray waves if you want. And there we go. A little bit of fluidity and motion. Now I'm going to make sure that I'm putting my paintbrushes in just a little bit of water to preserve them, especially if I'm going to be using them later on while I'm painting. So once you do a touch test of your sky and you make sure that it's dry, we can move on to the mountains. How's everyone's sky looking? Is everyone's sky dry enough? Because if we do our mountains and we do them while it's still wet and we try to do too many layers on our mountains, it will begin to show the orange underneath, and we'll have some slightly orange mountains, which won't be that big of a deal, but it depends on how much of the color leaks through. So let me know in the comments if your sky is ready to go, and we will start cutting in our mountains. So for the mountains, if you want to get your paint ready, we're going to be using the same blue, And this time, instead of adding white to it, I'm going to put it in this same portion here because I'm using all the same colors and I'll be able to mix them. And I'm going to put just the tiniest drop of black paint just to make my mountain slightly darker than the darkest part of my lake. If you think that you might not be able to put the tiniest drop of black into your blue paint, what you can do is just add it in a separate portion of your plate or your palette or whatever you're using to hold your paint. And you can just go in with the paintbrush that you're going to use to mix the two, and you can just take the smallest bit of black on your paintbrush and you can work it that way. And you find if you get just too much black on your brush, you can just put it on a piece of paper towel, wipe it off like that, and just start stirring. And you can get it to whatever consistency you would like, as long as it's just slightly darker or darker than the darkest part of your lake or your ocean. You want to make sure that you have enough of this color because you don't want to have to try and remix it. While you're at it, why don't you just add just a little bit more of the blue, just the lighter blue that we'll use for accent on our mountains once we've gotten them all painted down. Now here is the paintbrush that I'm going to be using to cut the mountains. I'm using an angled edged brush because it's going to be a lot easier for me to cut in the mountains when I can cut in with that diagonal brush. However, if you have a flat brush like the one I was using to paint the sky, that can also work too. Or if you find that you might not be able to do very clear lines with a large brush like this, you can just cut in with a small brush. You can just cut in the lines of your mountains and then fill them in with a larger brush like this. Now here's where things get creative. You can make your mountain range however mountainy, however flat you would like it to be. I'm just going to go in and I'm going to start just making triangles. You can see I've taken this paint and I've just patted it down so that my brush end, not sure if you can see it on the camera, is flat. Whereas when I put it in the paint, it was filled up with paint and all of the bristles weren't totally flat together. So just flattening it out like this on a piece of paper towel or on my paint plate is going to help me to cut a nice clean line for my mountains. You can make your mountains however tall, however small you would like them to be. Don't worry about crossing the lines here because they're all going to be filled in once you've cut your line. I'm going to add a little bit of one right in there. And then I'm just going to go back over my lines and I'm going to cut in a little bit of a shoreline too. This shoreline can have little lines sticking out of it. The land isn't necessarily flat. It can help build character in your painting. I'm just going to start filling in my mountains. These mountains, depending on your paint, might need a couple coats. Mine are definitely going to need at least 2 because you can see that orange underneath. So try not to paint over what you've already painted too much, or you might bleed into the paint below. And depending on the type of paint you are using, it might show your brush strokes. So you want to keep your brush strokes as even and going in one direction as you want. I'm painting from the right side to the left because I'm left-handed. Doesn't matter what kind of side you start on as long as you keep it going in one direction. And if you find that you need a smaller brush than what I'm using, use whatever brush makes you most comfortable and helps you to fill in your mountains the best. I am going in slightly sideways just to fill in close to the lines, but then I am just going quickly over it so that it's all going in the same direction, because that's what I find easiest to keep that already cut line that I have going for the mountains. And each time I go and I get new paint, I'm still going over to my paper towel or my palette and just wiping down my brush on both sides so that it keeps that nice clean line, because I don't want any surprises with tons of paint going over the beautiful lines that I've already cut for my mountains. Oh, and make sure you don't do what I'm doing, putting my hand on the painting while it's still drying. And again, just a reminder, if your mountains do happen to go over the sides of your canvas and you like to paint the colors on the sides of the canvas, make sure that you're doing that, because if you don't do it now, you might not have the right colors to correct it once the painting is done. So again, just to reiterate, we want to keep the brush strokes going in the same direction, but what I'm doing is just going across the line on the same angle that the line is so I can get a nice perfect cut. Because if I tried to go up and keep a straight line, I might make a mistake that I would have to cover up later with some orange. And hopefully, depending on the type of paint that you are using to paint this, by the time you've gotten to the other side of your canvas, this side of the mountains should be dry enough for you to start your second coat. So just keep an eye on your paint. You should be able to see, depending on the paint, again, that you're using, you should be able to see that it's mostly dry. I can see there's some spots on my mountains that are still a little bit wet. Again, if you got a hairdryer handy and you find that it's not drying fast enough, just plug that right in and you can get it drying a little bit faster. So I'm just going to start in on my second coat of the mountains. With this second coat, I don't necessarily need to be as detailed as I was on the first coat, because I don't necessarily have to go all the way to the edge of the lines, because it'll blend out a little bit from my first coat. And again, try not to go over it too much, because while this coat does appear to be dry, it's still very precarious, and if you put too much paint over it and you keep going over the same spot, you'll find that you'll be showing that orange paint below. And once we've gotten the base coat of our mountains done, and we find that there's no more orange paint peeking through from our sky like here, then we will be able to go in with our detail work, put a little bit of snow on our mountains, a little bit of shadow to help those pop. So you might find, like me, depending on your paint, again, I'm going to be saying that a lot tonight, you might find that, I don't really need to redo this mountain, but there's a couple spots where I need to touch up, and you might be tempted to touch it up while it's still a little bit wet. Just be cautious with that, because again, you might bleed through to the other layer and end up making it look more orange than it already is. If you don't have a hairdryer, you can just simply wave your hand over the paint. Just be careful that you don't get too close, because you don't want to scrape the paint off your canvas. So I'm just going in and I'm filling in any spots that I see that are slightly orange. Some of you might need to do a complete third coat just to get that nice color on your mountains. And there we go. And if you think you want to fix up your shoreline a little bit, go ahead and fix up your shoreline. Just be careful of that wet paint that you already have resting on your mountains. I'm just going in and making my shoreline a little bit lower over here because I can see a little bit of that orange peeking out, and I want to make sure that I can just hide that, and I can just hide that by making my shoreline a little bit lower. And I'm putting a little bit of these lines just to show maybe where some inlets are or some islands, and how the land isn't always symmetrical, and it can be varied in how it looks. Now while you're waiting for your mountains to dry, you can use the same brush that you use to help cut, or a smaller brush to help do the snow on our mountains. To show you what that's going to look like, I'll bring up the original painting. Now don't worry so much about the mountains on this side. You still want to make them look good just in case they peek through, depending on how you paint your tree. But the mountains mostly on this side of the painting will be what's seen, and the other ones will be covered by the tree. So you can see on this painting, you've got just the barest hint of a lighter blue or a lighter white that's just used as snow or as shadow on your mountains. And you can use this lighter blue that I've got, it's the same color blue from the bottle, but it's the same base as the blue that we've used for our mountains, so it will be nice and complementary. Now, depending on how dark you made your mountains, maybe you want to make your blue a little bit darker, or if you made your mountains not that dark, maybe you want to make this blue a little bit lighter. To help create the shadows, you're going to make sure that it goes all one way. So you want to make sure that it's going in the direction where the sun is, where the sun would be casting the shadow on the mountains. Now you see I've created dimension with my mountains I've gone down, so you can decide which mountain you want to be in front, which you want to be behind, and using the shadows of the snow will help you to create that illusion. Now I'm just looking here for my last coats. My mountains are still just a little bit wet. How is everyone else's mountains doing? Are mountains dry yet? Do you need another minute for them to dry? We just don't want our snow bleeding in and taking up that fresh paint, and again, letting the orange show through underneath. So I'm going to be going in with the same brush that I used to cut the mountains. I'm going to make sure that it's adequately washed. Now you are using the same root of blue, so if there's still a little bit of blue in your brush, that's not going to matter too much, but you want to make sure that it is completely dry because you don't want to use that water and strip the paint that you've already done underneath. I don't see any comments to, oh, there is one that's still a little bit wet. While we wait for our mountains to dry, what we're going to be doing next, now that hopefully our lake has had adequate time to dry, we're going to be doing the grass and the islands next. For the grass and the islands, you're going to need much a similar brush to help cut your islands in, and you're going to need a fan brush. Here's what the fan brush looks like. The fan brush will help you to make your grass look grassy. If you don't have a fan brush, you can just use a small pointed brush to help with your grass. It will take you a little bit longer because what you're doing is essentially making one blade of grass versus 20 or 30. Okay, looks like we have got the go-ahead. Hopefully all the other mountains are mostly dry. Mine's looking mostly dry now too. So I'm gonna go back in, as I said, with my brush that I used to cut the mountains. And I don't want to overpower my mountains with this blue that I'm using. So again, I'm going to use much the same technique. I'm going to get it on my brush, and that's a lot of paint. So I'm just going to go onto my palette or my plate or whatever I've got my paint on, and I'm just going to get as much of the paint off as I can. You don't want too much. You don't want it to show up too much. And you're just going to go in and you're going to use your flat-edged brush, or I've got this slightly angled flat-edged brush. And you're just going to start from the one side and just bring it down. Ever so lightly. To give that illusion of snow. And if your blue is a little bit too close to your mountains, that's okay. You can give it a little bit of some white to help bring that blue and that snow out. So what I'm going to do, I'm actually going to make this one of my forward mountains. So I'm just going to drag that snow down, which gives the illusion that the mountain is in front. I'm going to take a little bit of white actually, and just lighten my blue just a smidge. And I'm just going to repeat that process over my mountains. Just to give them a little bit of a shadow. So I've decided to put this mountain in front, so I've just dragged my snow a little bit over the edge to help create that extra shadow, but it's still going in much the same direction that you would see the shadow moving. For this longer one, I'm going to give it a little bit of a longer shadow. And you just go with the shape of your mountains. And I'm going to cut this mountain in front as well. I'm actually going to go over my original mountains that I did because I lightened my blue paint and you can't really see it in the original. So I'm just going to go back over it. And I'm even going to lighten it just a tad more now that I've done my base. And lightening it just a little more will help to give the mountains just a little bit of depth. You want to make sure that you don't have very much on your paintbrush. Now this depth that I'm adding, I'm not going all the way out like I did on the original ones, just adding a little bit more, and I'm not going right to the edges because it will help to create that depth. If I covered over the original paint, it would take away from that. And there are the mountains. If you want to put even lighter, if you think that's a little bit too understated for me, you can go back over again. Don't go too far because you don't want to strip that paint below your mountain. And I wouldn't suggest using water to blend your mountains right here because it would make them a little bit too fluid. And you want that harsh snow to make it look almost like the different peaks on your mountains. And you want that harsh snow to come through in your painting and not be as fluid as the lake or the sky. So again, with this third layer of lighter paint, I'm not going totally to the end. I'm creating a little bit of a harsh gradient. And that harsh gradient will help to establish my mountains as mountains. And there we go. And I'm going to make sure that I'm going to put my paintbrush in water. So for those that have been here since the beginning, we're almost an hour in. We've got about half an hour left on the painting, depending on paint dry. Next, we're going to be moving on to our grassy island inlets. And once those have dried, then we will be doing the main part of our painting, which is our beautiful cherry blossom tree, which takes up quite a good chunk of our painting. By now, once you've done your mountains, your lake should be dry depending on the type of paint that you used. If anyone's paint isn't dry, just let me know. What we're going to do is, again, take one of the same paintbrushes with a flat edge or a diagonal edge. If you don't have one of those, one of the curled edges will be fine to use for the island inlets, just because they will be a little bit more bushy and they will be covered by the grass once we've put our grass in there. So getting your grass ready. Hopefully you're not running out of palette space. Just get some green paint ready. If you don't have any green paint, yellow and blue paint mixed together. I've got Christmas green is what I used for the original painting, so that's what I'm going to be using today. I'm going to make sure that it's well shaken up. And I want to create a lighter green and a darker green. So I'm actually going to put that in there. And to add my darker green, I'm just going to go in with some black. Again, you can put a dollop in straight from the bottle if you want, or if you feel a little bit safer, just add a little bit on your paintbrush and mix it in from there. You're also going to want to have some black ready to help with shading on the grass. So make sure that you've got some black ready for you, not black that you've mixed. I'm going to use the same black because I didn't put much blue into it. So it's not going to stand out too much. So I'm just going to use a little bit of black. And I'm going to mix that into my green. And again, if you find that it's too dark or too light, just add more of the other color. And once you've got your green to your desired shade, then you can start cutting in your islands. So for my islands, I went for a little bit of an island inlet. So we've got our island that our tree is on, a little bit of a break where the lake comes through, and then a little bit more of an island. So you can make your islands whatever you want. They don't have to be the same as mine. And they can be whatever shape that you would like them to be, as long as you've got a little bit of an island here where you can place your tree on once we are starting our tree. And I'm just going to go for it. Now again, these are islands, so they're not going to have totally straight lines. They might have a few bumps here or there, just to establish and make it pop off the canvas. And make sure again that you're wiping off your brush and you're just adding only the paint that you need. I didn't bother cutting lines like I did with the mountains because I'm at the bottom of my canvas. So if I make a mistake, that line that I cut is just going down to the bottom of the canvas. I don't have to worry about accidentally cutting through my water line like I did with the mountains. And once again, hopefully you're not tired of hearing this, but sometimes it needs to be reminded. If you like drawing out your paint to the edges of your canvas, I know there's lots of times where I've done that and I've drawn out the paint for most of it, and then I forget to do it for something like my grass inlets, and then my painting is totally complete except for the sides right by the grass. So make sure if that's something that you like to do that you're pulling it all the way out to the sides. I'm just going to give my grass a little bit more of a second coat. but it's going to be covered with our grass eventually. So it doesn't matter if it doesn't look quite full, because hopefully with your fan brush, the grass will cover any mistakes or any non-finished layers. There we go. So that's just cutting in your island. They can be as tall or as short as you want them to be. And I'm just going to put I'm going to put this brush to the side in case I want to use it to fix up anything. You can put it to the side anywhere, wherever is easiest, as long as you don't get green on your arms. And this is where our really cool fan brush comes in. So hopefully you have a fan brush if you're following along at home. This will be the easiest way to do your grass. What you want to do when you're doing the grass, you don't want to go from the top down, because then all of the paint that's on the edge of your paintbrush will glob at the top. What you want to do is make sure that you're going from the bottom up, because as the paint runs out on the paintbrush, it will create this really fine line to help create your nice fine grass. And as with all of your other paintbrushes, grab paint on the edge of your paintbrush and make sure that you just blot it down here, or blot it somewhere that you can get all of that excess paint off. And then you're just going to go in, remember, from the bottom up. And you're just going to see if you can go very lightly. You might need to turn it a little bit. I'm doing what you could do with one of the smaller paintbrushes, one of the pointed paintbrushes. You could just be going up from the bottom and creating your grass like that. Try not to overdo it on the grass. You might find that maybe you want to add a little bit more grass. And just watch that you're not filling it up too much. You can go in with the brush like I'm doing here. Instead of going flat, I'm going with this more straight edge, and I'm just adding a couple more grass blades that are a little bit taller than the ones that I've established. And again, you want to follow with the flow of what you've already created. So it's going to be taller up here because that's how tall my hill was, and it's going to be a little bit shorter as you get into the inlet. You can make your grass go different ways. Perhaps it's in the sun or in the wind, blowing in the wind. And if you find that you can't use the fan brush this way and put it straight up, again, you can just go in with one of your fine tipped brushes. Make sure that you make it nice and flat. And you can just go in from the bottom up and just add your own blades of grass like that. Now a lot of the grass over here is going to get covered by our tree trunk once we start our tree trunk. So make sure you save the colors that you're using over here so that you can just go over the tree trunk after it's dried and just add a few more blades of grass to help establish that dimension of the grass in front of the trunk. And once you've got your main layer of grass down, you might actually want to go through and take just a little bit of the existing grass, or the existing green that you have, sorry. Just take a little bit of that, put it into a new palette, and just add a little bit of black to it, just so it's a little bit of a darker green than what you used. And again, you want to wipe off your brush because you don't want a lot of that black showing through. You just go back over. This might not, don't make this as tall as the grass because again, you're trying to add dimension. So this is grass that's in the foreground, the green grass is in the background. You're adding a little bit of dimension to your painting and helping it pop off the canvas. And again, remembering you're going from the bottom up to help establish that nice cut crease of the grass. So as I've stated, we've just passed the hour mark. There's about half an hour, 20 minutes left. After we've finished our grass, we're going to be moving on to our tree. Now, the blossoms are going to take a lot of paint in one go. That's not going to be able to dry. So we want to make sure that our tree trunk has time to dry. So we're going to take a little bit of an intermission once we've done our tree trunk. It'll be about 10 minutes to help just let everything set and dry before we move on to the rest of our blossom tree. So if you're aching for a break, you're going to have one in about 5-10 minutes once we've finished all of our grass and our tree trunk. So again, you can do as much grass, as much darkness and lightness as you want. You can even alternate. I can put this half of my brush in the lighter green, this half in the darker green. Again, put it down like that. It'll help to create those dimensions. And what I'm actually going to do now is I'm going to take just the barest bit of white on the edge of my brush. It doesn't have to go on the entire thing, just in different places to help, again, add to that dimension. And I want to make sure that I really get this off my paintbrush because I don't want to be adding pure white to my grass, but I just want to help highlight the grass. Just in spots. It's not going to be all over. I'm going to put my fan brush away now that I'm happy with my grass. I'm actually going to take my pointed brush. Yours might be a little bit smaller of a point. This one's quite long. And I'm just going to put it in my paint and I'm going to add some accents with some black. I'm just going to swirl it around. I find the best way to get this into a nice fine point is to just very gently swirl it on your paint so that you retain that very sharp point on your paintbrush and you've got minimal bits of paint to help just with your detail work. And this is again just to establish a little bit of 3D-ness, if you will, to your grass. You can go over and do the same with white if you'd like to. And there we go. We have our beautiful grassy inlet. Now, depending on which island you did first, they'll be drying at different times. I did this island last, so it's a little bit wet, but I know that once it's dried, I'm going to start doing my tree trunk for my cherry blossom tree. So while we wait for that, I'll just show you The cherry blossom tree, when you do your trunk, it can be as straight as you would like or as knotted as you would like. I gave it a little bit of some bumps here and there to help add dimension to the tree and give it a little bit of 3D-ness, calling back to that last word that I used. So once your grass is dry, you can go about. You can see that there is some covering here that I've done after. We'll do that detail work after our tree is done. For our tree, you're going to be using some brown paint. I've just got, this is called Burnt Umber. You can use brown paint. If you don't have brown paint, I believe if you mix all of the colors, purple and orange especially, will help you make a brown, and you can come up with and mix the right consistency and shade of brown that you would like for your tree. I'm just going to use one of my dry palette spaces. Now for the tree trunk, you're also probably going to want some black on hand, especially if you don't like the color of your brown. I'm going to actually make my brown just a little bit darker. Again, going in with a paintbrush, and I'm just going to grab a little bit of black, and I'm going to mix that in. Now don't worry if this color doesn't totally mix, because the little swirls of black that might come out while you're painting will actually add dimension to the tree anyways. So if you don't mix up this brown quite well and there's little swirls of black in it, that is all right. Once you've got the color that you are happy with, you can start painting your tree. I'm going to be going in with one of the same brushes that I used to cut the mountains and to cut the grass, something with just a nice edge that I can use to help me cut the mountain. Make sure if you used it already that it's completely dry, so you're not using any of that water to help spread the paint around and ruin your undercoat that you've already accomplished. For the tree, it's going to be going in a little bit of a curved shape. Your branches will go out every which way, but once you've got your tree trunk established, you can just build off your branches from there. Everyone's tree is going to look a little bit different based on where you decide to put your tree branches, and that is all right. What I'm going to do, I'm going to dip my paintbrush in, and if everyone's done their grass, then they can start on their tree. Let me know if you're still working on your grass, and we can just take a moment. And I'm just going to start cutting in my tree. So again, for your tree, it can be whatever shape you want. It doesn't have to be two straight lines. Give it a little bit of character. Maybe some bumps here or there. Make sure you just fill in any lines if the paint's not working for you. And here's where it gets fun. You can see that on my original tree, I've got one kind of main branch that goes out quite far, just past the edge of the middle of the painting. So I'm just going to follow a little bit of so I want a branch to go here, and just branch them out and give them some branches. They don't have to look totally perfect because, as you can see, they're mostly covered by the cherry blossoms after I painted them, but sometimes, like these ones, they will be sticking out of the cherry blossoms. So just make sure when you're painting them that they might be seen by after you've done your cherry blossoms. What I'm going to do is just plan out where I think my main branches will be. And from there, I will thicken them up and add all of the little offshoots of branches. Maybe you have one that's going off the page, helps add a little bit of depth into your picture and helps it make it feel more alive. So right now you should have a little bit of a spider hand looking tree. And you're just going to fill it in. These are the limbs of your tree, so you want them to have a little bit of thickness to them until they get to the end, when they will peter off into being a little bit thinner. And you're just going to keep adding until you've got nice, thick limbs on your trees. And once you've got the limbs established, then you can start adding branches. If you find that the paintbrush that you're using right now is a little bit too thick for doing the branches, just grab one of the smaller brushes and start doing the branches from there. You want to make sure that you're pushing out and not starting your branches from the outside and going in. Just as you had with the grass, if you start from the outside going in, it'll be thicker on the outside of the branch and thinner by the time you get to the trunk. So you want to make sure that you're going from the base of your limb and going out. Again, don't worry too much about these. They won't necessarily be poking out, except for maybe this outer branch that might be a little bit longer. That might be pointing out, and the ones just at the edges, because they won't necessarily have cherry blossoms around them. But for the ones in the middle, they don't have to be totally and completely perfect, because they will probably not be seen once we've got our cherry blossoms on our tree. Once you've got your branches established, you can add little offshoots to your branches just to add a little bit more of that 3D-ness that I've been talking about. You want to try and stay with the general shape of the tree that you've created with these limbs. And once you are happy with your limbs and your branches, you might need to go back over especially your tree trunk and just maybe do another layer or two of paint just to make sure that none of that lake blue is showing up underneath. And as you get to the smaller ones, you're making smaller and smaller strokes. You might want to pull out that smaller pointed paintbrush that I was talking about. So now I'm just going to go back over my trunk, follow the lines that I've already created. Just give it one more coat. Careful of your wrist on your painting in case anything's still wet, especially the grass. Now again, don't worry too much about the limbs in here getting a second coat. They will be mostly covered by the cherry blossoms, but it gives you better peace of mind to do a second coat on the outer branches, just so that you know they will pop and show up once we've done our cherry blossoms. Now you'll notice that I put my tree trunk slightly raised off the grass. That's because it's sitting about midway in my island. Your tree trunk could have gone off the edge of your painting, that's fine too. Because I didn't have my tree trunk go over the edge, I'm actually going to just go through and do the same technique that I had with my fan brush or with a little brush once the tree trunk is dried, and just do a little bit more detail work with the green grass. So while we let our tree completely dry, we're going to take a little bit of an intermission, so feel free to touch up anything on your painting that you want touched up, do any other layers on your tree trunk that you think you might need to do, go to the bathroom, wash up your paint palette. Mine is quite full, and you're going to be using a lot of different colors for the tree, some dark pinks, light pinks, whites, and reds, and things like that. So you might want to make sure that your palette is nice and washed up and clean so that you can have all of those new colors on your palette. And I'm just going to do a little bit of touch-up of grass off screen, which my tree is dry. If anyone wants to see that after or wants some help with that after, let me know. But we are going to take a little bit of an intermission while we wait for our tree trunk to completely dry, because our cherry blossom tree is going to have quite a lot of paint that we're going to be putting on. One thing, if you don't already have them, I am going to be doing the cherry blossom tree with Q-tips. Seems quite strange, but it will actually make it go by quite fast. I've got 6 Q-tips. I've just secured them with a tiny elastic so that they can stay nice and secured in my hand. So if you don't have any Q-tips with you right now, go and see if you can find those in your houses. If not, grab something with a round end. A lot of your paintbrushes will work too, but these will help to blend the paint because they're a lot softer than the tip of a paintbrush. So if you don't have those ready, go and grab those during your 10-minute break, and we will be back soon. Hello, hello. We are back. Hopefully you had some time to run to the bathroom, some time to clean your brushes. I had a little bit of time. I just cleaned off my palette so that I wasn't confused by any of the extra colors or accidentally blending any of them. And I just got my colors ready for our beautiful cherry blossom tree, which should hopefully be dry by now. As you can see, I just added a little bit of extra grass to kind of blend in and hide the bottom of my trunk of my tree. If you wanted to do that, just hopefully you kept your green paint and you didn't throw it away. So if you didn't hear or if you didn't see before the break, we're going to be using Q-tips to create our cherry blossom tree. And again, if you don't have Q-tips, you could find something with a round end, perhaps some of your paint brushes. They all have round ends. However, the Q-tips, being soft and pliable, will better be able to mix the colors and really press those colors into the canvas and help blend them, whereas the harder end of a paintbrush might not allow the colors to blend as well. So if you have those Q-tips, hopefully that's great. I find that this is something that hopefully a lot of people have in their houses and readily available. I'm using the same Q-tips that I used reduce, reuse, recycle. I'm using the same ones I used on my original painting. And if you need a refresher, the original painting has a couple different colors, lots of pinks and whites in there. So I've got all my colors here. What I've used is a regular, this is cherry blossom pink. So that's a good color to use for your cherry blossom tree. I also used Tutti Frutti. Very funny name. I also added red and Tutti Frutti, this is bright red, just to make a slightly darker pink for myself. And I've also got white at my disposal. Hopefully you can see all those colors. Now again, they don't have to be the same colors as me. I'm just working with a couple different colors to help establish that texture on the page and help make the cherry blossom tree pop. Now the same thing with what we did with our mountains and with our grass and things like that. You want to start with one color and work your way up. So we're going to start with a darker color to help establish the shadows of the tree in that way. So you can go with your darkest pink. You can also go with your second darkest pink if you'd like, and just dip your Q-tips in, get a little bit of a mix of the colors, and just start blotting them on your tree. Now you want to try and follow the same pattern of your tree trunk and your branches and your limbs. So you're going to go out slightly farther than the tree branches to simulate the leaves and the cherry blossoms that are off your tree. You want to make sure that I've got a couple stray blossoms. Those will probably be covered up by the additional colors that I'll be putting underneath. But you want to make sure that those blossoms are at least touching some of the other blossoms, so they're not just floating in midair. And again, you want to follow kind of the same pattern that you've got with your tree trunks. So as I said, look, you're mostly covering up your branches, but it's good that they were there and that you painted them so that you can know where to put your cherry blossoms so that you won't be lost. And I'm just going to keep putting on that darker pink to help establish those shadows. Now while the branches aren't joined, you will want to join your cherry blossoms, unless you've got very far apart branches. So in this instance, I'm going to bring them around so they're joined in this U shape. And again, one last reminder, if you've got some branches going over the sides and you want to bring that all the way over to the side, then make sure that you're doing it on the side of your canvas. Now, once I've gone around all the edges, I'm just going to fill in what I've missed in the middle. And this is where it's going to get fun and slightly messy. You're going to just keep doing your next colors up, darkest to lightest, sorry. And it's going to get quite heavy and wet with all the paint on there. So try not to run your Q-tips across your tree because that will smudge the blossoms that you're creating. Just making myself some more paint here. Doesn't matter if you run out of paint, doesn't matter if it's completely the same color because it's all just the background and it's all going to blend together anyways. So this is where you get a little bit of freedom with your paint night. Once you think that you have adequately covered with the darkest color, you can go ahead, pick your next lightest pink, and just start doing it all over your tree as well. Now you'll notice with my tree, I added a little bit of depth, so I kind of tried to go with the boughs. I layered it on the boughs and tried to make a little bit of dimension that way. So keep that in mind while you're putting your next pinks on. And again, if you think you need to blot your makeshift paintbrush, make sure you do that before you put it on your tree. So again, just like when we did our multiple colors on our mountains, I don't want to completely go out to the edges and cover up that first pink that I've used, but I'm going to keep going just close enough to the edges to add that shadow and that texture to our painting. And it doesn't matter if your pinks get mixed up, if you're using your pinks here to blot out your paintbrush, because it's all going to get mixed with our tree anyways. Just going to give my tree just a little bit of time to dry before I do my next color, because you don't want it all blending together too soon. And again, going back to my earlier comment, if you have a hair dryer handy, that will make the drying process a lot faster. Or a fan. So what I'm starting to do with my lighter colors is what I was saying earlier. I'm trying to follow the boughs with how I'm placing my lighter pinks so that I can help establish some of that shadow. So with this lighter pink, I'm only going really on the tops of the boughs. and then blending it into the middle. And that's helping to create the shadow effect and the textured look of our cherry blossom tree. And I'm just going to be adding some here to some non-existent boughs, but it'll help to add that 3D-ness that I've been talking about all night. It'll make it seem like there's some other boughs that I haven't painted that are in front rather than behind, and it'll help to establish that texture on the page. So where the center of the tree is here would be, from the camera's angle, probably the highest concentration of blossoms. So you're not necessarily going to see different boughs reaching out or different branches reaching out. And if you want, you can just go in, put different colors on each of your Q-tips, and just add a little bit of texture back in there if you find that it's lacking texture. And you just keep going, just adding all your dots until you've got that happy color that you'd like. You can even dip into your white. I would suggest making the white blossoms a lot lighter on your Q-tips so that you're not overpowering the pink with the white, and just add it here or there. Again, on top of the boughs to help establish that texture of your tree. You might notice that your Q-tips are falling apart a little. And the white will really bring up those shadows and make it look like just the last rays of sunshine that are hitting the tree. And once you are happy with your cherry blossoms and all of your shadows, you'll have a beautiful, as Bob Ross would like to say, happy tree. Now, depending on how you painted your cherry blossoms, most of your limbs are probably disappeared from the tree. You can continue to add more colors if you'd like to your cherry blossom. But once your cherry blossom tree is dry, you're going to want to go back through with a sharp, small, pointed paintbrush. And you're going to want to add some detail work branches just to help with the illusion that this tree is popping off the page. So you'll see from the original, I've gone through and I've added these little extra branches in, because you know that you're not going to just see cherry blossoms, when you look at a real tree, you're going to see some of the branches popping out. So once that's dry enough, you can add just a little bit of brown to your palette, or you can use the same brown that you used for your tree if you darkened it or lightened it. I'm just going to add the tiniest little bit because that is all that I will need. And just the tiniest bit of black to add to my brown as well, because I made my brown a little bit darker. So all you need to do with that, if you're still doing your cherry blossoms, that's all right. You just want to roll it out again very slightly so that you've got a nice fine point on your paintbrush, and just go around. And you do want to follow your boughs because you want the boughs to be sticking out. And you're just going to do little branches sticking out all over your tree. You don't want them all to go the same way, so perhaps there's some sticking out below the tree. You can lengthen and recolor some of the boughs that might still be sticking out that weren't covered by your cherry blossoms. And you really just want them going every which way. To establish that texture in your tree. Don't just stick to the outsides too, add a couple in the middle. Put one up here. And that will help to just add just the tiniest little bit of texture to your tree. It doesn't look like much, but it does add just that little bit to make it better. Perhaps I'll have one sticking right out here. And there is your cherry blossom tree painting. Now, if you are happy with your painting and you want to keep it that way, that would conclude the paint night. However, if you want to stick around and learn how to do some small bees, I've done some small bees and detail work here. If you want to stick around after that and learn how to do some bees, then feel free. I'm going to add a couple of those to this new painting. But other than that, thank you for joining me for this paint night. It was my first time doing this, so hopefully it was all right for you. It didn't go too fast or too slow. And once you've got your painting finished, I would say snap a picture of it, send it to us. You can put it as a comment maybe on this video or on our post after. Perhaps we'll make a post with this finished painting and you can put your version down in the comments. But thank you again for joining me for this paint night. I hope you had as much fun as I did painting this. So now I'm just going to get some yellow and some black paint for my bees and for our excellent detail work. I didn't add any clouds to my painting, but if you feel you want to add some clouds, some fluffy clouds, as Bob Ross would call them, I think that there's a lot going on in the painting already, and just adding a couple bees at the end just ties it all together with this big tree here and just a little bit of detail here. So I'm not going to add any clouds, but it's your painting, so you can do whatever you would like to do. So I'm going to make sure that I have some yellow paint, some black paint, and some white paint, which I've already got from my cherry blossoms for their wings. I don't need too much paint because they are quite small. This is where you will want to grab one of your small paintbrushes, depending on the size of your canvas. I'm going to be using this small one with a rounded tip. It's about 2 millimeters in diameter. And I'm just going to go through, our lake should hopefully be dry by now. I'm just going to get a little bit of yellow on my paintbrush. Again, I'm going to blot it down here. And I'm just going to make 2 little beans. It's the best way I can describe them. 2 little beans. A bean there, and a bean there. You could also, if you didn't want to put bees here, you could also do some cattails that you see in marshes. Perhaps this is a marshy lake. You would just use one of your paintbrushes, go up with a line, and do a little bit of a brown, I guess a brown bean, just like my bees here. And my bees are going to need a little bit of a second coat. This is where the fast drying paint comes in handy. Once you're happy with your little bean bees, you can wash and thoroughly dry that little paintbrush. And once your bees are mostly dry, you can go in and do the detail work of their little black stripes. It's all right if you do a little stippling with your brush, because that will give them the illusion of looking a little bit fuzzy. Little fuzzy bumblebees. I'm going to do black right here, and then I'm just going to do the smallest. You might not be able to see it on the camera, but I'm just doing the smallest little antennae on them. And again, using that stippling to make them look a little bit fuzzy with their fuzzy bumblebee selves. And the antennae. And go ahead and wash and thoroughly dry that brush as well, because next you're going to be using white for their wings. Now you will want to make sure that they're thoroughly dry before you do the white for the wings, because this black and yellow will show up a lot through the white paint and will blend a lot more than a darker color, and will show that blending. So you want to make sure that they are thoroughly dry, or mostly dry, before you do their wings. And just make sure if you used this same white for your cherry blossom tree that you're not getting any pink in it. And you're going to do the same thing perhaps I can get this closer. And you're just going to do little oval wings for your bees. You can use the same stippling technique to get the wings for your bees to just match their cute fuzzy little bodies. And there we go. So if you stuck around to to get some bees and some extra detail work, don't forget the branches if I distracted you with the bees, if you want to add a couple more branches to your trees. And again, this is your painting. So if you want some Bob Ross happy, fluffy little clouds in your painting, then go for it. If you want to add a little bit more to your mountains, if you want to add a little bit more to your lake, maybe it is a marsh, maybe it does have cattails, or maybe it does have lily pads in it. You can add whatever you would like. It is your painting. So thank you very much for joining me for this virtual paint night. I hope you are happy with your painting, and I hope you will share your paintings with us once they are done on our Facebook page. Thank you, everyone, and have a good and safe night.